One arrow, fired into the chaos of a battlefield, didn't just fell a king, it shattered a world. Imagine a single day, one sunrise to one sunset, where the entire future of a nation was decided. The language you speak, the laws you live by, the very ground beneath your feet, all of it can be traced back to this one brutal, bloody day in 1066. This wasn't just a battle. It was the violent birth of modern England, a moment when one culture was extinguished and another rose from its ashes, forever changing the course of Western history. But what if the story we all know, the one about an arrow in the eye, isn't the whole truth? What if the real turning point was something far more subtle and far more human? To understand the explosion of 1066, we must first understand the world it tore apart. Anglo-Saxon England, in the early 11th century, was a kingdom of misty shores and timber halls, a land rich in poetry, faith, and fierce loyalties. For over 500 years, the Anglo-Saxons had forged a distinct identity, a patchwork of kingdoms united under one crown. Their society was built on a complex web of obligations between lords and their fighting men, known as thanes. It was a world governed by the Witan, a council of wise men and clergy who advised the king and, crucially, had the power to choose his successor. In January 1066, King Edward the Confessor died without an heir, leaving a power vacuum that three ambitious men were determined to fill. In England, the Witans swiftly elected Harold Godwinson, the most powerful earl in the land and a proven military leader. Across the North Sea, another claimant watched with a Viking's ambition, Harald Hardrada, the fearsome king of Norway, who believed he had a claim through an old treaty. And just across the narrow English Channel in Normandy, Duke William felt a burning sense of betrayal. He was convinced Edward had promised him the throne years earlier. 3 men, 3 armies, 1 crown. England braced itself, unknowingly on the precipice of its own reinvention. The storm broke first in the north. In late September, Harald Hardrada's Viking longships sliced through the waters of the River Ouse. He smashed an English army at the Battle of Fulford and seized the city of York. King Harold Godwinson, receiving the news in the south, did the unthinkable. He force-marched his army nearly 200 miles in just 4 days. On September 25th, he surprised the Vikings at Stamford Bridge, catching them completely off guard. The battle was a stunning, decisive victory for the English. Hardrada and Harold's own estranged brother Tostig were both killed. The Viking threat to England was over, forever. But as Harold's exhausted men celebrated, a messenger arrived, breathless, with dire news. William of Normandy had landed. His massive invasion force was now on the southern coast, unopposed. Once again, Harold had to turn his weary army around and march another 250 miles south to face a new, even deadlier foe. He gathered what men he could along the way, and on October 14th, he took up a defensive position on a ridge near the small town of Hastings. His plan was simple but effective. Form an unbreakable shield wall. Let the Norman knights break themselves against it, and then counterattack. The battle raged for the entire day. William's knights charged uphill again and again, only to be repelled by the wall of English shields and axes. For hours, it seemed Harold's strategy was working. The Normans were close to breaking. In a moment of panic, a rumor spread that William had been killed. The Duke, in a stroke of genius, rode along his lines, lifting his helmet to show his face, shouting, "I live, and by God's help, I shall conquer." His presence rallied his men. But the English line, though battered, still held firm. Here is where the story takes a turn, where the official narrative gives way to a more complex truth. The Bayeux Tapestry, our primary visual source for the battle, famously depicts Harold with an arrow in his eye. This has become the iconic image of his defeat. But some historians question this. Look closer at the tapestry. The figure is labeled Harold, but is he the one with the arrow? Or is he the one being cut down by a Norman knight's sword just moments later? The Latin text above simply says, "Here King Harold was killed." It doesn't specify how. The arrow in the eye story may have been a later addition, a poetic, almost biblical way to describe the fall of a perjurer, as William's propaganda painted Harold. What if the real turning point wasn't a single lucky shot? What if it was a calculated deception? Twice during the battle, Norman knights pretended to flee in panic. The first time, some of the inexperienced English fled. The militia troops broke from the shield wall and charged down the hill in pursuit, believing they had won. They were quickly surrounded and slaughtered on the flat ground. William saw this. He saw the crack in their discipline. Did he order a feigned retreat a second time, a deliberate trap to lure more of the English from their high ground? This tactic, a feigned flight, was a classic Norman maneuver. It required immense discipline that only a professional army possessed. By goading the English off their ridge, William negated their advantage. The unbreakable shield wall was broken not by force, but by trickery. The king's death, whether by arrow or sword, was merely the final blow to an army that had already been tactically outmaneuvered. The battle was lost not by a fluke, but by a fatal, human error in judgment. The death of Harold Godwinson on that field was the death of Anglo-Saxon England. William marched to London, and on Christmas Day 1066, he was crowned King of England in Westminster Abbey. The change was not gradual. It was a brutal and total replacement of an entire ruling class. Within a generation, the English aristocracy was all but wiped out, their land seized and given to William's Norman, French, and Breton followers. The English language was pushed to the margins, replaced in all official business by Norman French and Latin. A new architecture of dominant stone, castles and cathedrals, rose across the landscape, symbols of a new, unshakable power. The Doomsday Book, a massive survey of his new kingdom, was an accounting of his spoils, treating England like a conquered business to be managed. This conquest tethered England to mainland Europe for the next 400 years, pulling it into a web of continental wars and politics. The Anglo-Saxon world of thanes and timber halls, of Beowulf and the Witan, vanished into the mists of time, becoming a memory, an echo. And yet, it didn't completely disappear. Out of the clash of Norman French and Old English, a new language was born, the English we speak today. A language enriched with the vocabulary of law, government, art, and food from its conquerors. The Norman principle of a strong, centralized monarchy laid the foundations for the modern English state. The very concept of common law has its distant roots in the administrative systems the Normans imposed. The conquest was an end, but it was also a beginning. It was a violent grafting of one culture onto another, and from that wound, something new, resilient, and uniquely English grew. The echoes of Hastings still reverberate in our parliaments, our courts, and our very words. History is never just a story of kings and battles. It's the story of consequences, of how a single day can send ripples across 1,000 years. The Norman Conquest reminds us that our world is built on the foundations of the past, often in ways we never even see. Thanks for joining us on Echoes of Time. Subscribe for more stories that shaped our world.